everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I've been off for a week. Lots of action-packed stuff came into the channel in January, and February is going to be even more action-packed. So to start it off, it is Saturday the 5th of February, so the first weekend of February, and I am at my local train station and I'm off on a new adventure to somewhere I have never been before, pretty much the same as when I visited Kensington Palace. Today we're going to Kensington Palace, which is again owned by the historic royal palaces. I have a membership so I can get in for free. I've pre-booked my ticket and I'm just about to start my journey there, and I'm so excited to take you somewhere brand new again. And yeah, I'll show you some shots of my journey there, and then I'll see you on the other side. As you've seen, I have arrived at my destination. Well, kind of. I've arrived at the train station I need to get off at, and now I'm just going for a wander to find the actual palace. It was really easy to get here. I overestimated how long it would take completely, so I've kind of had about half an hour to kill, so I've just been having a wander around. I found the Waterstones. If you know me personally, you know I love reading, so I kind of just had a wander around, saw what books they had, and then decided to make my way up to the palace, ready for my time slot at 11 o'clock. Obviously, restrictions have also changed again recently, but the palaces are still saying to wear your face masks indoors if you can. Obviously it's now a choice, but they would still recommend in indoor spaces for you to wear your mask, and so I will adhere to that rule today. It's different when I go to a theme park because I'm mainly outside, but where you're in a palace, sometimes the rooms are quite small, so I prefer to be on the safe side and wear your mask, but you don't have to. If it's quiet and there aren't too many people around, I will probably take my mask off. But to start off with, in indoor spaces, I will wear it. So I will see you when I get up to the palace and we'll get a shot at my first reaction. So there, through the trees, is the palace. I think it looks like the palace. To be honest, I'm really confused as to what the hell I'm doing and where I'm going, because as you can see, I'm in the middle of a very pretty park and I have no clue how I'm meant to get in. So this is an adventure. I've never been here before, but I'm really excited to finally be here Obviously in residence you currently have Prince William and Kate Middleton and their kids, but it was also known for being where Queen Victoria lived when she was in London. So let's head inside. So I think I found the entrance just here, but obviously I forgot to mention, of course, the late Princess Diana would have lived here as well, and it's where she brought up the kids. But just the setting of this place is so incredible, and it looks so pretty with the blue sky, very similar to like the red brick of Hampton Court against the blue sky. It really stands out. I'm so excited to get inside and have an explore. So here's the entrance to Kensington Palace, and when I first arrived I decided to start with the Victoria story, which is about Queen Victoria's childhood and growing up at Kensington Palace. The first room in which I'm entering now is the jewel room, and on display in the picture is Queen Victoria's crown, earrings and necklace that were gifted to her by her husband, Prince Albert. I thought it was a really nice room to start with, just to see some of the tiaras and some of the crowns and other jewelries and accessories that Victoria owned. In this room, there was also a display of a tiara that Victoria gifted her granddaughter Louise. Overall, I think it was a really pretty room, and I absolutely love the emerald green of the crown and jewellery that Prince Albert gifted her. The room in which I enter now is where you learn the basic story of Queen Victoria when she was born here in 1819, and in the centre of the room there is the model of the palace, which you can see on screen now. 4 rooms are lit up inside the model, which show the key characters in the story. In the first room, you have Princess Victoria looking at the model house. This is where you learn that the Duke of Kent, who was her father, died when she was a baby, which left Victoria 5th in line to the throne. By the time she was 11 years old, she was the sole heir to the throne. In room 2, you see Victoria and her older sister Theodora, who is technically her half-sister because it was from her mother's first marriage. Also in that room, you meet Dash, who is Victoria's dog. In room 3, you see Victoria with her governess. The governess was a very strict but kind woman who earned a lot of respect from Victoria in her early years. And lastly, in the 4th room, you meet Victoria's German mother, who is the Duchess of Kent, and her advisor, John Conroy. I really like the room and the way the model set out the story for you and all the characters involved. But also, don't forget, this is a real life story. This actually happened to this girl. And as you move through the rooms, you see what parts these people play in her life. And let's just say some of them are not the friendliest. The next stop on the tour was the room in which Victoria used to play as a child. In here, in the first display cabinet, you can see lots of different little dolls. And Victoria herself was a very creative child, and she spent many hours making the costumes and writing up stories for each of the dolls with her governess. She was also very creative in the fact that she had a sketchbook, and she used to do many different drawings of different people around the palace, including her own dog if he would sit still. These are also on display in the room. Another beautiful artefact from Victoria's childhood is the music box on display, which is a personal favourite of mine. But of course, in a room surrounded with so many different artifacts from her childhood, the star of the show has to be the cabinet of dolls with their handmade dresses that the Queen herself made. The room you see on screen now is Victoria's study. This was where she focused on her education from the young age of 4. In the bookcase on screen are books that she would have been reading for her studies, and some of them are very unlikely for a female in that time, such as arithmetic, science, and Latin. Victoria's life was dictated by the rules known as the Kensington system, and these were set out by John Conroy and her mother, the Duchess of Kent, to basically control Victoria's life. For an example, the simple thing of walking downstairs she couldn't do unless she was holding someone's hand, which I think is really bizarre. She also didn't even have her own bedroom here at Kensington, as she was required to stay in her mother's room. I don't know about you, but I think that's just a little bit too controlling. The next room is right up my street. From the young age of 12, Victoria was blown away by performances she saw at a ballet or at a theatre, and she especially loved operas. Here in this room, you have a small replica scene of one of her favourite all-time operas, and this was actually performed for her privately in this room. I think it's just an incredible space, and it's nice to see her creative side as well. As scattered around the room, there are sketches she made of different scenes from her favourite theatre productions. The short clip you are about to see is a small snippet of the replica opera production. In this room, you start to learn how the family fell apart during family feuds as Victoria neared the age of being able to become queen. Here, John Conroy and her mother, the Duchess of Kent, sent her on a gruelling royal progress across England and Wales to gain connections with aristocratic families and to establish Victoria as a popular future queen. Here she visited many towns and cities, in which she did fall ill during a visit to Ramsgate in Kent, but more about that in a second. In these pictures, you can see the small travel bed in which Victoria slept in on her journeys, and this is one of the very few surviving artifacts from this time. And obviously you can imagine it would have been a lot to carry around, lots of heavy stuff for servants to carry, and also not the most comfortable thing to sleep in. The man on screen in the portrait painting is Sir John Conroy. This was the confidant and advisor to the Duchess of Kent, but he was a very difficult man and didn't have the best relationship with Princess Victoria. This here is the man who controlled her throughout her childhood in the hope that he would gain some power. As previously mentioned, in Ramsgate on her first royal progression, Victoria fell very ill with a serious case of typhoid fever. It was during this time that John Conroy tried to force the young Victoria into signing a document to say he would be her regency and take control of her household until she came of age. Despite being seriously unwell, Victoria managed to refuse this and didn't sign the documents, and I can imagine history would have turned out a very different way if he had managed to have got her to sign these documents. Also on screen you will see a picture of 2 exercise clubs. These were used by Victoria to help regain her physical and mental strength back after her illness, and I think it says something that she kept them as a reminder, and I suppose you could say she saw them as her own sort of weapon against John Conroy's motives. The room on screen now is a very, very special room in the story of Victoria. This is where she first danced with Prince Albert before they were married at just the tender age of 16. The story goes that it was her 16th birthday and her mum was hosting a dance and she invited Albert and his brother Ernest. Victoria and Albert were just instantly attracted to each other. But Albert wasn't a party animal, and in Victoria's diary she wrote that he danced twice, then turned as pale as ashes and retired for the night. But this was really where their love story blossomed, and it feels really special to be in the room where their first meeting happened. It's really strange, but in a really nostalgic way. And in one of the short clips you see, there's loads of candle sticks in the room, and on top of one of them is a little model of Victoria and Albert dancing. On the 24th of May 1819 at 4:15 in the morning, Princess Victoria was born. The room you see on screen now is the room in which she was born at Kensington Palace. The interesting story with this was her mum and dad were currently residing in Hanover in Germany at the time when her mother was pregnant, and they rushed over to Kensington Palace days before the birth to make sure that Victoria was born on British soil. And at the time of her birth, as mentioned previously, she was fifth in line to the throne. Another really interesting fact is the bed. This bed was then the bed she slept in with her husband Albert many, many years later. And it has a really poignant story behind it, as once Albert had passed away, Victoria refused to sleep in the bed, and she never slept in that bed again. But she always carried around a photo of that bed to keep the memory alive, which I think is really sweet. Another thing with the birth is, although Victoria's mum came across as very controlling in later years, you can tell she had a lot of love for her daughter, as she described Princess Victoria when she was born as a pretty little princess as plump as a partridge. On the morning of 20th of June 1837 at 6 a.m, Princess Victoria was awoken by her mother to the news that her uncle William IV had died and she was now Queen of England. Later that very afternoon, Victoria held her first Privy Council, which is shown in one of the pictures in a recreation on the table in the middle of the room. This was where she made a promise to serve the country as best she could, and also she could make rules of her own as she had turned 18 earlier that month. And honestly, it was freedom for her. The first thing she did was dismiss John Conroy from Parliament and from her service, which led to her being estranged from her mother, as her mother didn't quite agree with the decision she made. Further to this, Victoria arranged to have her mother's bed moved out of her room at Kensington Palace so she could have her own private space. However, that didn't last long, as only 3 weeks later she moved from Kensington Palace to Buckingham Palace and never returned to Kensington. Her coronation took place on the 28th of June 1838, a year after she left Kensington Palace. And in her journal on the evening of her coronation, she wrote, "I cannot say how proud I feel to be queen of such a nation." It's also known that as soon as she returned home, she gave Dash, her dog, a bath, still wearing her coronation dress. This then concluded my tour of the apartments that shaped Princess Victoria's young life. And as I walked down the stairs to start my next tour, I just imagined how it felt for Princess Victoria walking down those stairs to meet Albert for the very first time. The next set of state apartments I decided to walk around would be the King's State Apartments, and this started with the King's Staircase, which you can see on screen now. This really took my breath away. The moment I stepped into that hallway and looked at all the details on the ceiling, on the walls, I was just in utter awe. This is your first link to the circuit of rooms that make up the state apartments. All the great and good of Georgian London would have climbed the stairs to visit the king. However, visitors to court could only enter if their clothes and jewels were acceptable to the guards, so they had a dress code, pretty much like some nightclubs have dress codes or bars or restaurants in today's times. The staircase paintings were completed by William Kent, and I just think they're so beautiful, and I definitely took my time walking up the staircase to look at them all. The next room you see on screen is the King's Gallery. This is the largest and also longest room inside the state apartments. These were completed in around 1700 for William III. And this is also where William played soldiers with his nephew. And also, after a riding accident at Hampton Court Palace, it was in this very room that the king caught the chill that led to his death in 1702. The big draw in this room is what is on screen now. This is the weather dial, and this is still in working condition after 300 years. This wind dial moves by chains and pulleys that are attached to a weather vane on the roof, and lucky enough, it was quite windy on my visit. So I got to see the thing in action, which is playing on screen now in a short clip. The room on screen now is called the Presence Chamber. This would be where you finally come face to face with the king. Or would you? If the king was here, you would be ushered into the royal presence to bow and kiss the king's hand. However, most of the time, the king wasn't actually in this room, but you were still needed to bow to the empty throne, which seems a bit weird. Or, if the king isn't there, the Queen would have been sat here instead, and you would have had to bow and kiss her hand or curtsy if you were a woman. The ceiling is showing out a scene in Rome, and Apollo is in his chariot in the middle of the ceiling. I thought this room was really, really beautiful, alongside all the carvings over the fireplace by Grinling Gibbons. And I spent a lot of time in this room just soaking up the atmosphere and thinking about what it would have been like. The last room on our tour of the King's apartments was the Privy Chamber, and this was one of Queen Caroline's favourite entertaining spaces. You can tell this because she decorated the room as propaganda to prove that her husband, George II, was fit to be King of England because he was from Hanover in Germany. So hanging around the room, there are loads of portraits of previous English queens and kings to show their heritage and that they fall in line with their relatives. So you have Queen Anne on one wall and also King Charles I on another. Also in this room are loads of busts of thinkers and scientists and playwrights of that time. And one of them is Isaac Newton, who obviously discovered gravity. And Caroline was really into the science and the experiments, and also let Isaac Newton host a load of demonstrations in this very room, which would have been something really exciting to see back then. My journey then continued into the Queen's State Apartments and into the Queen's drawing room. This is a very simple yet beautiful room where Queen Mary would have sat and just did some writing or entertaining of her closer friends, and you can actually see in the wood panelling a W and an M engraved, which stands for William III and Mary II. This room also then leads into her bedroom, which is a very small, cosy room, but this is also a room filled with sorrow and tragedy, as this is where Mary found some rashes on her skin, which then turned out to be smallpox, which she passed away from on the 28th of December in 1694. William, being the devoted husband he was, refused to leave her side during her illness and slept on a camp bed beside her right up until the end, which I think is very cute. The Queen's dining room was the next stop on my tour, and it was not what I was expecting. Kings and Queens of England have been known to make dining a very public affair where people would even come and watch them eating. However, William and Mary weren't like that. They liked to keep it very, very personal so they could enjoy each other's company, showing that they were really in a devoted marriage. And I think the simplicity of the room is what makes it so beautiful, with all the different ceramics and different types of wood used for the table and the chairs. The small room you see on screen now is the Queen's closet. This was a room where the Queen could withdraw from the social world of the gallery to just have a little bit of private time. This is also where Anne, who is Mary's younger sister, became queen after William III died in 1702. She is seen in the picture hanging on the wall. The beautiful room on screen now is the Queen's Gallery. This was where Mary liked to show off all her ceramics that she'd collected from around the world. And there would have also been lots of shelves with lots of different collectibles that she had collected from her travels. In a lot of the ceramic vases, there would have been tulips, as these were a very popular flower during William and Mary's reign. Also in this room, you would have found cages for birds covered in red velvet, filled with cockatoos and lovebirds, as well as a little cushion made of satin on the floor for her pugs. Mary really liked her animals and really looked after them, and this room was known to be bright and colourful, a real play on all your senses as you walked in, from the heady perfume of flowers to the bright red velvet on the walls. This simple room is in fact a very special room. This is the Queen's staircase and is the oldest staircase in the entire palace. And it's also the first staircase which combined the banister with the actual stairs. This was Mary's escape into her beloved gardens through the door at the bottom of the stairs. And this was also where my tour of all the state apartments inside the palace concluded. So I have finished my tour of the palace, starting off with the story of Queen Victoria growing up here and then looking at the King's and Queen's state apartments. The palace is beautiful, but as you have seen from the footage, unfortunately I couldn't really film in there, so instead I've just done it a little bit different with pictures and a voiceover, so I hope that worked. Saying that, I probably could have filmed in other rooms. Maybe it was just the first room I couldn't film in, but that's fine. We've made it work, hopefully. And I have just been to their on-site gift shop, and I've also just got some lunch. So I will see you once I've had some lunch. So today we went for the spring still water and a tuna panini. So after that really nice lunch in the cafe on site, I'm having a wander around the sunken gardens, and then that will conclude my visit here to Kensington Palace. It's so much more than I was ever expecting. I've always been excited to come and visit here, but there's so much more to it than I was kind of expecting, so it's really exceeded my expectations. And it's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. highlights definitely seeing the room where Queen Victoria was born and learning more about how her and Albert met. And it's crazy to say I've walked up and down the staircase where they first met when she was just 16, and then where their love blossomed. And it was, even though it was an arranged marriage, it was a marriage of love. And then again, the King's and Queen's apartments with names I recognise from Hampton Court Palace, like George II and his Queen Caroline and Mary and William. It's nice to see how they all kind of link in together. And it's just been really, really nice. And their apartments are amazing. Like the King's staircase, I was just in awe, as you will see from the clips before. But yeah, let's have a wander around the gardens and then we'll wrap up the vlog. So the thing I've just walked up, these really tall windy pathways, is known as the windy walk or the wibbly walk, which leads up to the main like sunken gardens, which I'm heading up to now. But again, the palace is just situated in really nice surroundings. Again, you're about a 2-minute walk from Kensington's High Street, and it's just so peaceful. It's really pretty. And then up there are all the state apartments you walk along. So that's like the King's and the Queen's apartments. And this is really pretty. This is like a big garden area. This area is just so beautiful, and that's a really pretty statue at the end of Diana with William and Harry. It's very poignant because of course she lived here for so many years, and when she died in 1997 this place was filled with people mourning her at the gates, the golden gates over there, which I'll get a quick clip of. I did get a clip inside the palace, but I'll get one as I leave. And yeah, it's just a nice place for people to reflect. The Diana Memorial is somewhere over in that direction in the grounds of the actual Royal Park. But yeah, this is just, it's done really nicely. And again, you can kind of imagine what it would have been like in earlier times, way before Diana and Victoria, and you can imagine it in like a Georgian kind of thing. You can kind of see similar styles to some of the gardens at Hampton Court, which were owned by the same people who lived here for a while. So let's carry on heading around. So as I was just saying, here's your front of the palace, and then there are the gates. But yeah, also another thing quickly, that wind dial on the top is, you saw something that looked like a clock that was moving inside one of the staterooms in the King's apartments, and that is controlled by chains and pulleys that is connected to this little wind dial on the top of the palace, and then it shows you the direction the wind is changing. As you can see from the video, it was quite active. So yeah, it's something really interesting to see, and that it still works after 300 years, I think it is. Crazy. And so that concludes my first ever visit to Kensington Palace. It's a beautiful, beautiful palace, it really is, and there's just something about it that seems very magical, as with so many other royal palaces or homes. It's just something really special, stepping back in time to, you know, even the near past, like 1997, the year I was born. It's weird. Like, I remember when Princess Diana died, my mum was in hospital waiting to give birth to me, and she's told me the story, how she used to watch the traffic lights changing, and then obviously she overheard the news, and I don't know, there's just something that you can tie yourself to a certain event in history, and it's just, yeah, it's a bit moving really. But anyway, that is it from the beautiful Kensington Palace, and the next videos on the channel will be for next weekend, which is a Blackpool Pleasure Beach's only weekend. And I will be joined by so many friends and lots of antics. There's going to be a small travel video, just basically to show you my journey there. I will be travelling with Tabitha, and then an Airbnb tour. We're staying in a house, and there's going to be 6 of us in the house, so we're going to do a couple of videos in there. Of course, some videos from the theme park itself, and also maybe a few little shots of what we get up to in the evenings. But yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been really nice to be back on camera somewhere new and sharing my adventure with you all again. So until Blackpool, I've been Lou, that's been Kensington Palace, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!